Warning. This episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Give us 1 hour and we'll help you change the way you think about happiness. Harvesting Happiness with Lisa Cypers Kamen is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Each week, Lisa spotlights diverse trendsetters and change agents who are the greatest contemporary thinkers and doers, devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. Your host, Lisa Cypers Kamen, is a widely recognized applied positive psychology expert, author, documentary filmmaker, and lecturer specializing in optimal lifestyle management. Let's get to it. Here's Lisa.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us on today's show, where you will learn about complicated connections, mind games, and broken bonds. My first guest is Dr. Deborah Vinall, who is a doctor of psychology, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and a certified EMDR and brain spotting practitioner. Dr. Vinall specializes in helping individuals heal from traumatic life experiences and painful relationship dynamics, and was awarded the Sandra Wilson Memorial Grant from the EMDR Research Foundation for her research on the impacts and treatment response of survivors of mass shootings across the USA. She is the author of Gaslighting, a step-by-step recovery guide to heal from emotional abuse and build healthy relationships. Welcome, Deborah. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, this is a pleasure. This is a subject that producer Andrea and I were really getting into, having juicy conversations about these emotional abusers. And I think we need to explain to our audience, A, what gaslighting is, and B, who the perpetrators of this behavior generally tend to be.
Sure, yeah. Well, gaslighting is a concept that's not new, but it's really come into the popular vernacular in recent years. It refers to basically crazy-making behavior. It's a pernicious attempt to make use the word victim, to make the target feel like they're crazy, to make them doubt your own perceptions and your own sense of reality. And it's used as a way to control you. So if you can't trust your own self, your own judgment, you're more likely to trust that person, and therefore they can wield that as a form of control over you. So the term originally came from, some people may know this from an old movie back in the black and white movie days, that in which the perpetrator was dimming the old gas lights they had in the house. But that was denied, that the lights were flickering. He said he wasn't home, but the lights were flickering in another part of the house, indicating he was somewhere in there. And so she came to really think she must be crazy if she can't even trust her own visual perceptions. And this was all very purposeful in order to get her into an asylum so that he could take control of the fortune hidden in the house and whatnot. So it's really an old term, but within the last several years, we've really started to talk about what does that look like in modern relationships, and how is that showing up?
Well, and let's talk about that, because it shows up in our personal relationships and it shows up in our greater cultural relationship as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we see it. I think part of the reason we've been talking about it more in the last several years is because we are seeing it in politics. Yep. And so it's really impacting everybody. But it's been going on for a long time as well in parent-child dynamics and domestic partnerships, even in employment dynamics, and really it can happen in any kind of relationship.
And I think that's the point, that the perpetrators of this behavior are the everyday people in our lives. They might not necessarily possess a complex psychological diagnosis. They just may be manipulative.
Correct. I would say that gaslighting exists on a spectrum. When it's really, really devious, you might see it in somebody who has narcissistic traits or even a narcissistic personality disorder. But it can also happen in everyday relationships when it's not as frequent or as targeted and intentional. I also think we need to be careful not to label every time somebody disagrees with us as gaslighting. I've seen that thrown out there, and I think it weakens. It kind of waters down the truth of what is really a very damaging behavior.
Let's give an example, another example of simple gaslighting, that we might have experienced in our lives.
Sure. I think you see it in really just flat lying, just straight out denial, crazy making lying. Like if you have turned in your report to your boss and they know you have, and they, just flatly deny that you have, that kind of thing. You're like, and then you start to think, well, maybe I dreamed that I did that. Am I crazy? Because why would this person that I have a relationship with lie to me about something so benign? And so then we doubt ourselves, because we have, at least most of us have, a bit of an ingrained sense of trust in the goodness of others. And when people go so far against that, then we think, well, it must be me.
So when we are being gaslit by another person, it undermines our trust in them, trust in ourselves, and it's being done to gain the upper hand, or the perception that it will give the other the upper hand.
Yeah, it really undermines our sense of ourselves, because our senses, our five senses, are how we connect to ourselves and to the world around us. And if you cannot trust what you hear, what you see, what you smell, if that's being undermined, you're losing contact not only with other people, but really with your own self. And that's so, so damaging.
Let's talk a little bit about how you came to do this work, because I'm curious how somebody like yourself, has an interest in this particular area of communication and relationship.
Well, as somebody who works with trauma, I specialize in trauma. I have a lot of people who come in who've been in really damaging relationships. I mean, I think a lot of trauma is rooted in relationship, not all of it, but a lot is. And this accompanies so much abuse, whether that is sexual abuse or physical or emotional abuse. It's a form of emotional abuse. And so it shows up a lot, but it's not talked about a lot. And so it seemed important to kind of highlight this aspect, because what I see over and over coming in is the idea that I'm not sure if I can trust my own memories. And that itself is a big obstacle to healing. If you can't claim your life experience, then you can't as much heal from it.
You had said something earlier about gaslighting occurring on the spectrum. That on the one more extreme side, it would be somebody who has a narcissistic personality or exhibits narcissistic kinds of features. And then on this sort of generic, everyday level, smaller types of transgressions that make us have self-doubt. However, the person who is on the receiving end of that gaslighting might not have the insight enough to understand what is going on, and the damage occurs and we don't even know what has hit us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. And I think the more often that it happens, the more it wears down your ability to perceive what's happening and to respond to it effectively. I mean, if you are surrounded by healthy relationships in most of your life, but you encounter this at work, you're more able to perhaps see it for what it is and set strong boundaries, or put into place a plan of action to somewhat protect yourself. But if this is something you grew up with, and then something that you live with in your interpersonal, intimate relationships as well, then it's really hard to fortify yourself emotionally against those kinds of psychological attacks.
In your book, Gaslighting, a step-by-step recovery guide to heal from emotional abuse and build healthy relationships, you talk about the gaslighter as having a playbook.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not just like one lie here and there. There's a whole range of things that you'll see that become a pattern. Because again, there's a total goal of control. And so you're going to see a range of behaviors that are working toward that and toward making you doubt yourself. So that can include acts of intimidation, which you're going to see, especially in domestic abuse. So, and also, I would say in parent-child relationships, there's a lot of different ways people define that as being domestic abuse or not, but using intimidation to control somebody, whether that's, physical intimidation or threats. You'll see these people fail to take responsibility for their actions. Everything's always somebody else's fault. And certainly in your dynamic, it's going to be your fault. They're not going to be apologizing with a real chronic gaslighter.
I was just going to ask if you would equate a gaslighter to be a bit of an emotional terrorist.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good description. I like that. Absolutely. Yeah, you use the word intimidation. You think about the use of force and frighten somebody into control. Yeah, that's a pretty good way of looking at terrorism on a micro relational scale.
And they're bullies.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
yeah.
if you were to turn the table on a gaslighter with using their own techniques against them, they couldn't tolerate it.
Oh, no. They wouldn't want to engage with that either, because it's all about being in control.
So they wouldn't necessarily even want you in their lives. That relationship would be hard if the roles were reversed for that person to tolerate that kind of relationship.
Right. I would be fearful that it would become violent, honestly.
So could you give us a little insight into the cycle of gaslighting, how it works, how it may start out perhaps very subtly, and then before we know it, we are the frog in the boiling pot?
Sure. Yeah, when there's some kind of aberrant behavior, you're more likely to be a bit confused by it at first, or see it as a one-off, or again, doubt yourself because it's not something that's happening frequently. As you start to really notice a pattern as becoming problematic, you might begin to push back. And that's when things become often more volatile, when you push back against something, because then that person either has to back down or escalate in order to maintain control. And if that fails to work and you remain in the relationship, then you're more likely to be in a place of acceptance, a more subdued approach, especially if it's been effective and you've started to really believe, like, okay, they are this great person that they think they are. Because it's another aspect of it, is they're going to put themselves on a pedestal, and often are very, very charming. So if you see this and everybody else thinks that they're great, what must be wrong with me to not see it? Okay, so they're great, I'm crazy. Then you find yourself in this more subdued position. And so it's kind of followed this arc up and then back down, and it continues on.
I have found myself in that situation in the past when I was much younger. And then there's a reckoning that at least happened for me, where I was like, okay, I've been made to believe that I'm crazy. And then, you get the perspective of somebody from an arm's distance or who has a meta view to the situation. And one day they say, no, you're not crazy. That's person really isn't manipulative so-and-so. Right.
Yeah. It's so helpful to have those people who truly know you and love and care about you, who are willing to speak truth into your life. And, that's another problem, is a really pernicious gaslighter is going to isolate you so that you can't have those voices speaking truth into your life. If they can't charm them, they will pull you away from them.
Let's take a break. This is a juicy subject. We're talking about gaslighting, a step-by-step recovery guide to heal from emotional abuse and build healthy relationships. My guest today is Dr. Deborah Vinall. She is a PsyD. To learn more about her work, please go to tamarcounseling.com, on Facebook at Tamar Counseling Services. You can find Deborah Vinall on Instagram at Deborah Vinall PsyD. Here comes that pause. We'll be right back. Wait. Before we take that break, I want to remind everyone how the new year brings new goals, and the practice of self-care is one of the most noble of them all. This year, I'm obsessed with growing thicker, fuller, healthier, and happier hair from the inside out. Did you know that millions of Americans experience thinning hair? It's common, even normal, and not widely spoken about. Hair loss can be caused by several factors like styling tools, stress, lifestyle, genetics, hormonal shifts like menopause, and more. Now is the time to change the conversation and stand up for our strands and well-being with Nutrafol. Nutrafol is 100% drug-free, physician-formulated, potent, natural botanicals designed for whole body health and hair as strong as you are. Nutrafol is natural and effective in reducing hair shedding and improving hair growth. In clinical studies, Nutrafol users experience thicker and stronger tresses in 3 to 6 months. 72% of men saw more scalp coverage and 86% of women saw improved growth after 6 months of use. What I love most about Nutrafol is that in addition to beautiful hair, these ingredients help me get a handle on better sleep, stress response, skin, nails, and libido. Who wouldn't want that? Join me and thousands of others who are standing up for our strands with Nutrafol to help achieve hair growth naturally. You deserve hair as strong as you are. You can grow thicker, healthier hair and support our show by going to Nutrafol.com and using promo code HAPPINESS to save $15 off your first month subscription. This is their best offer available anywhere, and it's only available to U.S. customers for a limited time. Plus, free shipping on every order. Get $15 off at Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code HAPPINESS for hair as strong as you are. Now let's take that pause. We'll be right back.
To learn more about cultivating sustainable well-being at home and the office, visit harvestinghappiness.com and explore Lisa's experiential on-site brain fitness workshops, corporate programming, and speaking engagement services.
And we're back. But before we get back to it, let's talk about the new year and how it's a time for rethinking about the way we care for ourselves. And when we take good care of ourselves, our bodies, minds, and spirits, we tend to be happier folks. And that's why I'm a devotee of Native, clean, simple, and effective personal care products for years. Native cares what we put on our bodies. I work out daily and love to sweat, but what I don't love is the stink. Truth be told, I'm a mega schwitzer who is crazy about Native deodorant. Native is all about stopping the stink the right way. That's the Native difference. Native's coconut and vanilla scented aluminum-free deodorant has been a longtime customer favorite. Native is on a mission to overhaul your entire hygiene routine with top-notch products that are made with simple and effective ingredients like shea butter and coconut oil, so you can smell well all day long. Native deodorant checks important performance boxes like aluminum-free, 24-hour odor protection, zero skin residue, and more than 10 heavenly scents to choose from. My personal go-to scent is sea salt and cedar. Now is the time to treat yourself with Native deodorant, body wash, bar soap, toothpaste, shampoo, conditioner, and sunscreen. Everything you need to elevate your self-care to the next level. Check out Native Baked by Melissa, a limited edition collection that smells good enough to eat, created to make every day a little sweeter, inspired by the signature cupcake sensation. This year, up your personal hygiene routine with Native. Go to nativedeo.com/harvesting or use promo code harvesting at checkout and get 20% off your first order. That's nativedeo.com/harvesting or use promo code harvesting at checkout for 20% off your first order. Now let's get back to the conversation. And we're back, continuing the conversation with Dr. Deborah Vinall. We're talking about complicated connections, mind games, and broken bonds. Let's return to the conversation. So, Deborah, prior to the break, we were talking about the definition of gaslighting, the gaslighter's playbook, understanding the cycle. And I want to now start at the moment of reckoning. You know, we're in this relationship with this person. We finally recognize that it's toxic, unhealthy. And what do we do?
Well, in recognizing that, I would say you have already begun the first step of healing is being able to identify the problem. And so I would further that with learning more about it, reading books, talking to professionals, trying to learn more about what is this really like so that you can identify how it's specifically showing up in your life and have a deeper understanding of that. And then a really difficult and yet important step that I think a lot of people are tempted to skip over is to allow yourself time to grieve, to face and notice what are the things that this has cost you, whether it's time, years spent with the wrong person, whether it's the lack of the kind of satisfying relationship that you wanted, that you deserve to have, whether that was with a parent or with a romantic partner or somebody else. Are there things that maybe you've given up in order to be with this person? And just allowing yourself really to grieve that and to release those losses.
I wanted to just talk a little bit about grief itself, because I think as humans, we are adverse to allowing ourselves to experience grief.
Yeah, we want to rush to happiness, right? Good vibes and all that stuff.
Yeah, I like that. We want to rush to happiness. That's true. That is a very human response.
Yeah, we live our lives in denial that death is awaiting us. And I don't mean to be grim, but I do think that there's value in recognizing these truths so that we can live more intentionally and fully in the moment to moment that we do have.
And when we do the grief work, whether it's on our own, through reading, through support groups, or outsourcing support through a professional such as yourself, we are then setting ourselves on a new course, hopefully a healthier course, where we're able to set boundaries. And this is where I think having a recovery guide like you've written is very, very helpful. So talk a little bit for somebody who is boundary challenged that might be listening, how they might start to lay the groundwork for healthy boundaries that are self-honoring, towards self and also towards others.
Absolutely. The purpose of grief is not to wallow in sadness forever, but in order to not skip an important stage so that we can move forward into creating the life and the relationships that we want, to move into a place of self-care and rebuilding. What have we noticed that we've missed, that we've let go of, that we've lost, and building those up. Getting to know yourself again, getting to trust yourself again, trusting your instincts and intuition that you've been systematically trained to discard. And as you know yourself better, it becomes possible to set healthy boundaries because you know what's good for you and you know what you want and what you need and what isn't good for you and what you don't want to have in your life.
So somebody who is new to setting boundaries, how would you suggest they go about doing that? What is a good starting point?
So first, identify what you need more or less of, and then think about what are some ways that you could communicate that. So, for example, perhaps you have a relative in your life that's constantly making comments about your weight whenever you see him or her, right? And that's not something that you want to make space for. It's not healthy for you. So first of all, figuring out that's something you don't want. Second of all, how can you verbalize that? But the third and really important last part of that is figuring out what is your action step. So a boundary is no good if it's not backed up with action. So that might look like, Mom, I'm not okay with you making comments about my weight. If you continue to do that, I'm going to end this phone call. We can try again another day. So boundaries don't have to mean the end of a relationship. And we sometimes get confused of that and scared of that. We can also be afraid that we don't deserve to take up that space to set those boundaries. And that's something else to work through. But it simply means you're backing up what you're okay with.
I like that example that you just shared. My daughter and I had a similar conversation a few months back. She's a young woman, young adult, and she's trying to find her way and her place in the world. And she did it in such a perfect way, similar to what you just described. I don't want to talk about X. And, if you keep doing it, we'll talk another day. And I was like, you know what? Good for you, girl. I was so delighted by her pushback because it was self-respecting. It was adult. There was no finger pointing. It was just like, this is what I need. And if you can't give it to me in this way now, then we'll just do this later.
I love that example because I love that you came from that perspective of the person who received the boundary and that it wasn't insulting. It didn't cause a fracture to your relationship. No. You felt respect for her. And I also think it highlights that she trusts you to the extent that she says, like, I know that our relationship can hold this boundary and you can hear my voice and we'll be okay.
Yeah.
But even if the person that you need to set a boundary with doesn't have that respect and you're not sure that your relationship will be okay, I want to say to every listener, like, you are still worthy of setting that boundary. You have the right to set that boundary. And if they don't respect it, you have permission to walk away or do what you need to do to enforce that.
I can give another very humorous example. I have 4 parents, so I feel really good about telling the story without disclosing which of the 4 they are. And this was a few years back. This one parent and I got in a heated conversation, and the parent could not contain themselves, could not contain their anger, and hung up on me, which is like, to me, just like an ultimate hard no. So I called that parent back and I said, let me explain something. Like, I understand that you're upset, and I can actually respect that you're upset, but we're in a loving relationship, and people who love each other, in my view, don't hang up the phone on each other. They might say, you know what, I'm too upset and I can't talk right now. We'll have to talk later. But that's a gaslighting maneuver right there, to hang up.
It's definitely the control move.
Yeah.
I would end this.
And I had never done that with this one of 4 parents. And it was amazing. It did shift the dynamics. We're all older now, so like we should be able to tolerate this stuff in relationships. So it was an amusement and also a win.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you were able to say, no, this is what I expect. This is what I deserve. And this is the way it needs to be.
Yeah.
You stood up for yourself in a really grounded kind of way.
So it's never too late.
Absolutely.
It's never too late to break the cycle and take ownership of our wants, needs, desires, and protect ourselves and the greater good. You know, if we are in these toxic kinds of dynamics with people we love, we are also the role models for other people that we love.
Yeah. That
we want to show them the way to these respectful, connected, loving relationships.
That's true. You know, a lot of us maybe in that, what do they call it, the sandwich generation, where we're raising kids. And as my friend likes to say, like, we're raising our adults too.
Yes.
So yeah, our kids are watching what kind of dynamic we allow with our own parents. And that'll trickle down through generations too. So we have to think about our responsibility in 2 directions at once.
In your book, Gaslighting, a step-by-step recovery guide to heal from emotional abuse and build healthy relationships, give us an example of some of the exercises or interventions that we can expect to experience when reading the book.
Sure. At the end of each chapter, there's 2 parts to the book. The first 3 chapters are more informational about gaslighting, emotional abuse, and some of the cycles. And then the last 7 chapters are the healing steps. And so at the end of each of those 7 chapters, there's 3 exercises that further the work of that topic. So whether that topic is grief or self-care or setting boundaries. So there might be some question journaling prompts. There might be guided meditations. There's one that I think can be pretty helpful is a decision tree for relationships.
Ooh,
yeah.
That sounds good.
Well, you know, I've noticed there's kind of a shift right now with a lot of people finding empowerment in disconnecting from toxic relationships. And that can be really good. But I think it's also important to realize it's not an all or nothing thing. You don't have to cut off every relationship that isn't perfect, because there are no perfect relationships. I mean, I'm in a pretty good one, but I can't call it perfect. So
Me too. But, you know, we'd all be alone and very unhappy.
The thing is, there's a psychological cost, not to just the person cut off, but to the person doing the cutting off. Now, sometimes it's necessary when there's just an abusive, toxic relationship. Sometimes it is necessary to have a clean break. And sometimes creating boundaries and speaking up for your needs can remold a relationship into something that's worth having. So I hope that decision tree can provide some guidance to help thinking along those lines. When is it important to try boundaries? When is it important to maybe call for intervention from, the police or something like that? When do you need to consider if there's pets involved or children involved? So there's so many different factors that can influence how we react to a gaslighting or abusive relationship. And again, like I mentioned earlier, gaslighting often accompanies physical or sexual abuse and definitely always emotional abuse. So how it shows up in a relationship is going to impact how you respond to it.
So I guess the bottom line is, if you or someone you know is connected to an emotional terrorist and is seeking enlightenment and relief, The book for you is Gaslighting, a step-by-step recovery guide to heal from emotional abuse and build healthy relationships, authored by my guest today, Dr. Deborah Vinall. Deborah, thanks for joining me on the show. This has been really a very interesting topic and one I know that most of us can relate to in one way or another. We've seen this character sometimes more than once.
We have lived with this person.
Yeah. To learn more, please visit tamarcounseling.com on Facebook. The page is at Tamar Counseling Services, and on Instagram, Dr. Deborah Vinall Psy D. Thanks, Deborah.
My pleasure.
Let's take that brief break and we'll be right back. Here's a reminder before we head out to the break. Home should be a place that brings as much joy as possible. Home should be a hub for happiness that's a canvas for connection and memory making. And these days, my house is operating as a hybrid castle, sanctuary, office, gym, workshop, recording studio, boardroom, creativity laboratory, and base camp hangout. You get the idea. Home is where I get to express myself as a designer and host of good times. Make your home a happy haven. Get ready for Joybird's New Year sale. Joybird offers crisp, modern, customizable furnishings and accessories for every space. Joybird is furniture that fits your style in a wide variety of vibrant and durable designs. Don't know where to start? Joybird's design specialists are standing by to help make your vision a reality. You can even book a virtual showroom appointment and order a fabric swatch kit, all for free. Ordering online has never been easier or more fun. From design to customer care, Joybird has you covered. Joybird furniture stands by its quality and craftsmanship. And if it's not everything you'd hope for, send it back within 90 days. Each piece is made with incredible care using responsibly sourced materials that are free of harmful chemicals. Joybird is also committed to a more sustainable future by partnering with groups like One Tree Planted to help conserve and restore Earth's precious natural resources. Simply put, Joybird furniture is made with top-notch stain and scratch-resistant fabrics and comes with a limited lifetime warranty. Joybird furniture can handle anything your family throws at it. Literally. Create a space that brings you joy with Joybird. Visit joybird.com/happiness and get 30% off your purchase. That's 30% off at joybird.com/happiness. Now let's take that pause. We'll be right back.
Did you know that happiness is actually good for your health? Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Connect with us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness. And follow Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen for a daily dose of inspiration.
Welcome back. We're continuing the conversation about complicated connections, mind games, and broken bonds. My next guest is Dr. Kristina Sharp. She is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Washington. She received her PhD in Family, Interpersonal, and Health Communication from the University of Iowa in 2014. Kristina researches difficult relationship transitions and the ways people cope with the disruptions to their lives. She is a frequent contributor to the New York Times, NPR, and the Washington Post. Dr. Sharp is a director of the Family Communication and Relationships Lab that is housed both at the University of Washington and Michigan State University. Welcome, Kristina. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a very meaty subject. And you shared with me a statistic that I found absolutely mind-blowing. Please share with our audience because it's fascinating.
So recent research suggests that at least 27% of adults experience estrangement. So that means about over 67 million people in the United States reported being estranged from a family member.
It's incredible. And we know in the past few years, let's say the past handful of years, that people have become estranged for differences of opinion, political parties, healthcare stands, many reasons. But there are also deeper reasons why people disconnect from the ones they love.
Sure, yeah. A lot of times it takes something fairly severe for people to decide to distance themselves from their family. When I talk to adult children, oftentimes they reported some sort of abuse, maltreatment, indifference. And that abuse could be anything from physical, sexual, emotional, to things like substance or drug abuse issues.
And when an estrangement happens, sometimes it's a liberation, isn't it?
So for people who are in an abusive relationship, estrangement certainly can be a healthy solution to an unhealthy environment.
What made you interested in this subject matter? How did you get into researching this particular area of relationships?
Sure. I was actually a graduate student, and we were discussing in class like what the meaning of family was and the different types of families, and talking about the ways in which some families often get painted as being less than or second best to other types of forms of family. And so the US conception of what a family is typically includes a heterosexual married couple and their biological children. So families like step families or adopted families often get pitched as second best. And for no other reason that they lack blood or legal ties. So my research kind of came about when I was thinking, like these gold standard families, like, are they doing all that well? And so I came upon a family estrangement and realized that, it's not just blood and law that makes a family. Like, communication and care and what we do for each other is really a paramount part of what it should mean to be a family.
I have a question about what percentage, or maybe you don't even know the answer to this question, but I think you might. What percentage of families follow the prototypical model? In other words, where it's the sort of standard family of origin, mom, dad, 2 kids, no divorce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I don't exactly know the statistic on that, but what I can tell you is that they are in the minority. So there's more family diversity than there are families that look like that.
That's incredible. And yet it's not really spoken about, is it?
Nor is it portrayed in the media. I think that like mediated depictions of family, like in the television shows we watch or the movies that we see, are often not representative of what the American family looks like today.
And does that have an impact on us? In other words, what we see in the media and the sense of disconnect that we might feel because our own family units are so different. I mean, I can see for a kid looking at media and saying, well, my family doesn't look like that then we're not normal.
Yeah, I think it can be really difficult. And, stigma comes from perceived difference and feeling like you're like in an out group. And I always think about Disney movies where like stepmothers are painted as these like absolutely horrible people. And I think that can create such like damaging expectations for children whose parents might be going through a divorce, and like the possibilities of their relationships with a step parent, for example, that we just get these messages that put us at a disadvantage or create unrealistic expectations about what a relationship could be.
Rather than the flip side being, oh, wow, I get a bonus parent, or I might get 2 bonus parents, and that's more love for me.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Let's go back to the issue of estrangement and how it affects us at different ages and times in our lives and developmentally.
Sure. So there's not a tremendous amount of research on estrangement. Certainly at the beginning of my career, I was just interested in what it is and how it happens. But I can say that estrangement might be different depending on the reason why a person becomes estranged. So I'm looking at right now LGBTQ adolescents who are rejected by their parents. And that's happening in adolescence, right? They're 16, 17, sometimes even younger children, compared to other forms of estrangement that might happen later in life, depending on the reason.
Let's talk a little bit about when we estrange from our parents as adults, because we don't often think about that. Like, that we might have had a perfectly decent, or maybe it was a challenging relationship when we were younger with our parents, but it's taken us decades to have the courage to disconnect because it's a toxic environment.
Sure, that's certainly a possibility. Sometimes adult children will wait till they're adults because they have more resources. So obviously, it's difficult to distance yourself from your parent when you rely on them to clothe and feed you. Alternatively, sometimes people distance themselves from their parents after they have children and see patterns repeating with their children that they want to stop.
Fascinating. What about the impact on parents, let's say, when the child disconnects from them? What has your research found in that area?
Oftentimes, parents report that it's absolutely devastating. There's such a disconnect between adult children and parent reports on the cause of estrangement, the experience of estrangement. So, a lot of my research has been on adult children, and I report about that. But the research that Kylie Aglias has done certainly would suggest that parents are suffering. They're very unsure why this is happening to them, and they really want to reconcile with their children.
And sometimes the child doesn't want the reconciliation, that their minds are made up and their mental health is better served by keeping that estrangement, that disconnect.
Sure, yes. Oftentimes when I talk to adult children, one of the hallmarks of what they tell me is that they don't want to reconcile. And it's extremely difficult to hear that. We certainly live in a culture where the messages around family are that families are forever and that we have an obligation to our family. It's difficult for everyone going through this experience.
And talk a little bit about estrangement and how it affects other family members. So let's say, for example, an adult child is estranged from his or her parent, but the impact it has on the siblings or the aunts and uncles or family elders or even younger kids in the family.
Yeah, families are systems, so they're all interdependent, and what happens with one family member impacts everybody else. And my research suggests that immediate family members of a estranged parent child, dyads, feel like caught. They feel caught in between. They feel forced to take sides. It's often why they either report trying to reconcile the parents and the children, or they try to create some boundaries that exclude them from being in the middle. And then it's interesting to hear adult children who say, it's so stressful that, my immediate family members are trying to reconcile me. And then parents are saying it's so stressful because my immediate family members won't support me. So it's a really complex issue that has a kind of ripple effect throughout the whole family.
So when there's an estrangement, for example, in the family, and there's a younger child, I'm just going to pick an age, 8 or 9-year-old, and then maybe you've got a teenager. Does it affect them differently or very similarly?
I can't say for sure because I haven't done the research on that, but the qualitative accounts would suggest that people in the same family might experience the estrangement very differently. So I talked to a spouse and 2 children of a woman who was estranged from her family. The husband was very supportive. One child said, "It ruined my life."
Oh,
That I didn't have a relationship with my grandparent. And the other child was like, "Go, mom. Like, I'm so glad you got out of this unhealthy relationship for you." So people in the family might experience it really, really differently.
we're going to need to take a break. But before we do, I just want to do a little recap. And I would love, Kristina, for you to explain in a few words what an estrangement is and what it isn't. So people are a little bit clear. It's not having a fight. It's not having a falling out. It is a break and a distance. But I want you to allow us to understand what this really means.
Sure. So family estrangement is just one type of family distancing, but I define it as a process that occurs when at least one family member voluntarily and intentionally distance themselves from another family member because of an often ongoing negative relationship. So what estrangement is it's voluntary. So at least one person has to desire distance, as opposed to like some third party intervening, such as in foster care or incarceration. Estrangement is intentional. It means that at least one person decided that they wanted this distance. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't an instance of people losing touch. Estrangement is based on often ongoing issues. So rarely does estrangement just like happen out of the blue. Typically, there's like a longer history of conflict and negativity. Although there's some instances where it can be more sudden, such as when there's ideological differences that come to light. And then estrangement occurs because of often negative relationships. So people just don't desire to become distant for no reason, at least for the person who's initiating that distance. I've never talked to someone who didn't know why they desired distance, even though people in the family might disagree with that person's reasoning. Like, people just don't decide one day to estrange themselves from their family.
Are you saying it's not a natural state to want to be distance? It's that we generally want to go to, not disconnect, not remove from.
Well, we don't live in a culture where that would be really viable or where that is the expectation. So we, like, almost every culture is based around this idea where there's some kind of adult group caring for some kind of like younger population. And in the US, that's our parent-child relationship. And so it's not something you expect. Estrangement isn't something people expect.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will continue the conversation with my guest today, Dr. Kristina Sharp. To learn more, please visit www.familycomlab.com. On Twitter and Facebook, that contact is @FamilyComLab. Here comes the pause. We'll be right back, and that is a promise.
Who says money can't buy happiness? Whether you are a skeptic or seeker, check out Lisa's new book. Are we happy yet? 8 Keys to Unlocking a Joyful Life. A boot camp manual for greater emotional fitness is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, IndieBound, and HarvestingHappiness.com. Here's a truth bomb. Emotions are contagious, and happiness is a universally desired state. But we tend to forget that we all have the freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable each day, regardless of external circumstances. Explore the journey of human happiness, how to find it and keep it, with Lisa's documentary film, H Factor. Where is your heart? Visit HarvestingHappiness.com to learn more.
What is your happiness?
And we're back. Let's rejoin the conversation with Dr. Kristina Sharp. We're talking about complicated connections, mind games, and broken bonds. Kristina, I want to really touch upon one area of this estrangement in the sense of not everybody is honest or forthright to say to their loved one, I am disconnecting from you because of this. They just do it. And I'm wondering the ways in which they do it and the impact it has on the family system, which we did talk about a little bit in the prior segment, but how this all happens, how this goes down, and how it really can be very traumatic.
Sure. Yeah, there's different types of ways people kind of attempt to dissolve a relationship. One is more sudden. We might call it like a sudden death dissolution, where someone is more outright says, I don't ever want to speak to you again. You're dead to me. These are some ways in which people might try to accomplish distance. And then there's other forms of distance where it's more like a fading away, where people more slowly create boundaries. They might not explicitly communicate their desire for distance to their family member, but ultimately they fall along, like when estrangement can look many different ways, but it's usually along what I call the 8 characteristics of estrangement. So communication quantity has to do with how much you communicate. Communication quality is the extent to which that communication is meaningful. Physical distance pertains to how far people live from one another. the presence or absence of emotion, like when they think of that person, like how emotional is it for them? And then when they think of them, are those emotions positive or negative? Another characteristic has to do with reconciliation and their desire to be in that family. Do they hope to reconcile? Role reciprocity has to do with, do they do the things that family members do for one another? And then finally, legal action, like have people taken any legal action against the other person, such as emancipation and name change or changes to legal documents.
Wow, that seems like an intense step, and yet I know it is done.
Yeah, sometimes people particularly want to change their durable power of attorney, so the other person doesn't have the right to make medical decisions for them in case of emergencies.
So it's making a very, very pointed legal position, that this person is really not that close to me. I don't want this person being that caretaker of me.
Right. Although I would say that legal action is maybe less common than some of the other ways people might distance themselves. But they're all on a continuum. So it's not that people are estranged or not estranged. It's more that they're more or less estranged. And it can vary across any of those 8 characteristics that I talked about.
And I think it also, from what you're saying, it seems to me that it changes based upon where we are at different times in our lives. We might have a relative with whom we were very connected when we were young. Then we realized that maybe their behavior or the dynamics were not so healthy. We work on ourselves. We learn to separate and disconnect or become a little bit less passionate or triggered by their behavior. We take some separation and then we come back and realize, okay, I do want to engage. I don't want this person out of my life completely, but they're not, my go-to in terms of a place for caretaking or support.
Sure, yeah. And the research would suggest that estrangement often looks like an on-again, off-again relationship.
Interesting.
Where people are kind of cycling back and forth between closeness and distance, trying to find a right balance.
Would that suggest that on some level that estrangement could be considered a healthy or somewhat healthy tool in our development?
Depending on the reason, I don't want to make a blanket statement that yes, everyone should go estrange themselves.
No, I understand.
I think it's more depending on the reason, getting some distance could be healthy for you. And this is different than just people who parents and children fight all the time. This is different than that. People go through conflict. Conflict can be a great opportunity for positive change. So I think that's a little different than estrangement, which typically is more difficult.
Yeah.
Based on more ongoing issues.
And what about how much does honesty and communication play into the process for some? Because I would think that for some people, they would be quite clear and quite able to stand their ground and describe all the reasons why they need the disconnection. And then for others, they might find 100 different ways to demonstrate the disconnection, but not be truthful in their reasons why.
Yeah, I think that you're hitting on an important issue, which is there's often a real disconnect between parents and children's perceptions about what happened.
Yes.
And I think that the important thing is that fighting about a person's lived experience potentially might not be the way forward. Because if people are just arguing about being right, then they're not looking forward to what might change in the relationship if people are looking to reconcile.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was having this kind of conversation from somebody who is estranged from a parent. I was having it earlier today, and we were talking about the estrangement in the moment and then projecting the estrangement down the road to 10 or 20 years from now when that parent might not be here, would there be any regret for the things unsaid?
I mean, I think it changes from person to person. Estrangement is an extremely dynamic process, and there's lots of different reasons for it. And I think that influences people's experience of it.
In your research, have you studied people who have decidedly become estranged from a loved one and those who have done any of the psychology or work, personal work and personal growth work alongside that disconnection, what they've reported about themselves and their life satisfaction?
I have not done any of that work, although there are certainly researchers who are beginning to do more work around reconciliation. So Carl Pilmer has a book out called Fault Lines that address healing kind of family rifts.
Well, I'm actually not even talking about the reconciliation, about, let's say, the person who pulls away from the loved one and then is working on him or herself to reconcile with their own decisions, not necessarily with the person.
Oh, sure. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot of the people who I talk to are engaged in some sort of counseling and sense making, because it is really difficult to make sense of.
Especially when, they are your blood, that you are of them or with them or a part of their tribe, and you are making a very, very intentional step away from that unit.
Sure. And we certainly live in a culture where blood and legal ties are really privileged in our definition of family. And that's part of what makes estrangement so difficult for people, as opposed to alternative definitions that privilege things that are more, that you have a little bit more control over. So you can't control what your biological relations are, but you can control how you treat one another, or the affection you communicate to one another. So yeah, it just might vary depending on what you think a family is.
If you were to give one big takeaway to our listeners who might have a trying relationship where they're contemplating actually severing ties or stepping back, not just taking a break, but saying, you know what, this relationship is not good for me. I need to move away from this, but they don't know how to do it. I mean,
so one thing that I usually like to say when I'm being interviewed is that I'm not a counselor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a communication researcher. So I try not to give too much advice, because I see my job really is listening to people's stories and reporting what I hear. And so I'm not sure, I think if someone asked me that, I would say, this is something you might want to talk to a counselor about, to figure out what a good path forward for you would be.
Got it. We are out of time. That went really quickly. Yeah. Dr. Kristina Sharp, thanks for joining us on today's show. To learn more about Kristina's research, please visit www.familycomlab.com, on Twitter at FamilyComLab, and on Facebook, Family Com Lab. This was truly a very interesting conversation, an area that I had not really looked at so deeply. And I think that a lot of us can relate to someone in our orbit who has gone through this, or maybe listeners themselves are going through this. It's very interesting. Thank you, Kristina.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen on behalf of my guests, Dr. Deborah Vinall and Dr. Kristina Sharp, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day, and remember to be kind to one another.
Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime and anywhere, from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes via our free app, or from our libraries at toginet.com, iTunes, Google Play, and other fine podcast platforms. To learn more about Lisa's global consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Spread more joy by liking us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and following Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen. Harvesting Happiness is produced in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU RadioMalibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.